What would you do if the man who raised you declared you weren't family right beside your grandmother's coffin? I used to believe silence was respect, especially in a house as old and dignified as my grandmother's Georgian estate. That illusion shattered the moment my father, No Lawrence Whitmore, slammed the study doors and hissed, "Only blood relatives deserve the Whitmore fortune." His voice, usually polished for boardroom charm, cracked with something feral. Books trembled on the mahogany shelves like living witnesses. 3 days earlier, we had buried grandmother Eleanor beneath a canopy of turning maples. Now her study smelled of beeswax, wilted lilies, and fresh betrayal. Lawrence's cheeks burned red against his funeral black suit as he paced the Persian rug, eyes fixed on the gilt portrait of Eleanor above the fireplace. The painted Eleanor regarded him with knowing calm. I clung to that gaze like a lifeline. "What are you talking about?" I managed, though my lungs felt stapled shut. "Don't play innocent, Lena." He spat my name as though the syllables tasted wrong. "Your mother's little secret isn't a secret anymore. Once the lawyer confirms you have no Whitmore blood, you'll walk away with nothing." The room tilted. I was 27 years old and had always believed Lawrence's harshness was just the price of being his only daughter. Now he was rewriting my entire origin story in a single breath. My heart galloped, but I made myself ask, "So you promise only blood relatives inherit absolutely?" He lifted his chin, the same imperious tilt that had haunted every birthday toast and holiday prayer. "I'll keep the Whitmore legacy free of imposters." I held his gaze longer than I ever had as a child, absorbing the finality in it. And then, as if my life hadn't fractured enough, my phone buzzed. "Mom, we need to talk tonight. Alone." Lawrence stormed out, satisfied he'd delivered a killing blow. The oak doors thudded shut, leaving dust motes spinning in sunlight like restless spirits. I collapsed into grandmother's leather chair, tracing the walnut grain where she once drafted handwritten letters and reportedly a rather elaborate will that listed my name with deliberate care. Grandmother would brew Earl Grey, pass me a shortbread biscuit, and say, "A true Whitmore blazes her own path, darling." I used to think it was just grandmotherly cheerleading. Now it felt like prophecy, except maybe I wasn't the Whitmore she'd meant after all. Growing up in Fairfield County's shimmer of inherited power, I learned that the Whitmore name opened doors, but Lawrence's approval was the real currency. My brothers Camden and Seth wore that approval like custom-tailored armor. Cam shadowed Lawrence in the family investment firm. Seth had dazzled Yale Law. I, however, restored forgotten landmarks and wrote scholarly articles no one at cocktail hour read. Lawrence once called my passion project a quaint hobby loud enough for the waitstaff to hear. Grandmother Eleanor alone treated my ambitions as noble. Sunday teas at her mansion were my sanctuary, where history smelled of bergamot and dusty first editions. 2 weeks before she died, she pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. "Open it when you must stand alone, Lena." I slipped it into my journal and never opened it until tonight. Heart-hammering, I realize now might be that moment. I broke the violet wax and unfolded her spidery script. "If someone questions your place, remember truth is older than lies. Blood may bind a family, but character defines it. Trust your instincts and beware those who weaponize lineage." My instincts screamed toward the text from Mom. We met at a backstreet cafe where the Whitmore name earned only a misspelled receipt. She looked smaller than I remembered, chic jacket, wrinkled mascara, smudged. She didn't order tea. She clutched the ceramic mug for warmth. "I never wanted you to learn this way," she whispered. "Lawrence was cruel." "So it's true. He isn't my biological father." Her eyes shimmered. "It's complicated. Julian Lawrence's younger brother was my first love. When he left for med school in Boston, Lawrence stepped in while my heart was broken." Her voice cracked. "I found out I was pregnant the week Julian won a research grant overseas. Lawrence offered marriage stability protection. I thought I was making the safest choice for you." The cafe's hum faded into a high-pitched ring. Julian, the gentle uncle who mailed antique map postcards from every conference. He talked to me about Gothic arches and the poetry of ruins like my opinions mattered. That Julian, does he know I breathed? She shook her head. No one knows except me. And now apparently, Lawrence. He must have hired a private investigator after Eleanor died. My mother reached for my hand. Lena Lawrence wants the estate uncontested. He thinks discrediting you is the fastest route. But Eleanor adored you. She might have secured your inheritance in ways we don't see yet. Outside, wind rattled the cafe window, scattering amber leaves, the world rearranging itself. If Lawrence was willing to shred my identity to keep control, what else was he hiding? And why had grandmother whispered riddles about truth older than lies? I paid the bill in silence, a decision crystallizing with every clink of coins. I would confront Julian. Somewhere between his surgical wards and my architectural blueprints lay the foundation of who I really was. And I would uncover it before Lawrence weaponized another secret. That night, as the Whitmore mansion loomed behind iron gates, I realized silence was no longer respect. It was surrender. I packed grandmother's letter, my birth certificate, and a relentless determination. Tomorrow I would look into Julian's eyes and ask if he saw his past, and maybe himself reflected in mine. But even then, I had no idea how deep the Whitmore roots twisted, or how quickly they could choke the man who planted them. And the first real shock was still to come. Your birth certificate is only half the story. Mom's warning settled between us like a loaded pistol as she unfolded a weather-worn journal on our kitchen island, Grandmother Eleanor's diary, pages brittle with secrets. The entry dated April 12, 1997, stared back at me in Eleanor's looping hand. Julian left for Boston today. Catherine's tears broke my heart. I fear Lawrence's attentions are more opportunistic than affectionate. Mom's voice wobbled. I found this in Eleanor's sewing box the night before the funeral. She knew what Lawrence was doing even then. My stomach twisted. Lawrence had married Mom 6 months later, right after she discovered her pregnancy. The timeline fit too neatly. Did Julian ever suspect I whispered? Mom shook her head. He thought you were Lawrence's child. I let him believe it. Tears pooled, but her tone firmed. I was protecting you. Or so I told myself. The diary crackled as I turned another page, July 5, 1997. If bloodlines must dictate legacy, then truth must surface someday. I pray Lena inherits courage as surely as she inherits Julian's eyes. Courage felt far away, yet the next move was obvious-faced Julian Whitmore. I rang his Cambridge brownstone doorbell at dawn. He answered in surgical scrubs, eyes bleary yet unmistakably my own shade of storm gray. Lena, is something wrong with Eleanor's estate? It's about me, I said, voice trembling, and about you. Over bitter coffee, I told him everything: Lawrence's accusation, the diary, the looming will reading. Julian listened, jaw clenched, until at last he asked the question hanging like static. Do you think I'm your father? The dates align. I need to know. He exhaled hard, decades of unanswered what-ifs flooding his expression. Then let's settle it scientifically. Within an hour, a private courier from Gensure Labs collected our cheek swabs. Results promised in 72 hours, 72 eternities. Back in Connecticut, the Whitmore mansion buzzed with legal maneuvers. A thick envelope awaited me on the marble foyer table. Petition to postpone probate, filed by Lawrence's lawyer, Garrison Hyde. The allegation: beneficiary identity under dispute. He was buying time to erase me. That night, I crept into Eleanor's study, searching for leverage. Tucked behind a first edition Austin, I discovered a smaller safe code already set to my birthday. Inside lay a single velvet box and a notarized letter. The box held a rose gold signet ring etched with the original Whitmore crest, a phoenix, not the hawk Lawrence flaunted on his cufflinks. The letter read, "Legacy is not a straight line, Lena. Should anyone question your worth, present the crest that predates their arrogance. Phoenix, not hawk. Old Whitmore versus whatever Lawrence rebranded after seizing control." My pulse kicked. Eleanor had left me proof of a lineage Lawrence couldn't rewrite. 72 hours stretched until dawn the day before the rescheduled will reading. My phone pinged, Jen Shore results available. I opened the PDF. The world narrowed to one line. Probability of parentage, 99.9998%. Julian Whitmore, biological father. Tears blurred the words. Relief, fury, wonder, all at once. I called Julian. His voice broke on the first syllable. I always felt connected to you, he admitted. Now I know why. But joy morphed to dread when Garrison Hyde emailed an hour later. Be advised, Mr. Lawrence Whitmore will introduce decisive genetic evidence tomorrow invalidating your claim. Attached was a lab letterhead different from Jen Shore, an unauthorized test Lawrence must have swiped from a glass I'd left at dinner. He planned to weaponize his stolen results while ignoring ours. Mom paced the kitchen, fury blazing. He'll stop at nothing. Then we don't stop either, I said, slipping Eleanor's phoenix ring onto my finger. We show the tribunal who the real Whitmore descendant is. That evening, Julian sent another bombshell, an archived hospital ledger, showing Lawrence's birth name, Lawrence Hale. Adopted at 3 months by Harold and Eleanor Whitmore. The hawk crest had always been a cover for an adopted heir, and Lawrence never knew. If bloodlines were Lawrence's weapon, they were about to become his downfall. I scanned a fresh copy of the ledger, tucked it beside my DNA report, and stared at my reflection. Same storm-gray eyes, but now layered with steely resolve Eleanor would have recognized. Tomorrow, the library that smelled of lemon oil and old money would become a battleground of truths. Either I reclaimed my place or Lawrence lost the crown he never truly owned. And still none of us were prepared for the letter Eleanor arranged to arrive mid-reading. The storm broke at dawn, long before the autumn rain started pattering against my windshield. Julian and I pulled into Jen Shore's private lot, handed over our cheek swabs, and drove back in silence, two strangers tied together by a question that could upend an empire. Hours turned syrup thick. While my brothers fielded reporters outside Whitmore Capital, I hunted allies. First stop, Miriam Cole grandmother's personal attorney. Her townhouse was dark. A neighbor watering begonias called over Ms. Cole collapsed yesterday. Rushed to St. Stephen's, pneumonia, they said. Pneumonia, she'd been spry as a fox at the funeral. My gut whispered sabotage. St. Stephen's smelled of bleach and secrets. Miriam lay pale but lucid, oxygen tube hissing. When she saw the phoenix ring on my finger, her eyes flared. She rasped Eleanor. Left an addendum. Safe deposit box 43B. Her hand trembled as she slipped me a brass key. Trust your instincts. Alarms beeped. Nurses shooed me out. Back home, a courier blocked the walkway, Garrison Hyde's grin beneath a golf umbrella. He served me a subpoena, Lawrence petitioned to freeze all Whitmore assets until heir legitimacy resolved. Smugness radiated off him like cologne. Your move, Miss Whitmore, if that's still your name. That night, Mom's kitchen became war room. Julian video called lab results due in 48 hours. He'd also unearthed Uncle Harold's 1968 adoption file. A retired maternity ward nurse confirmed Lawrence's original surname, Hale. Proof waited in a dusty ledger. Camden texted Dad's furious. Says you're hosting secret DNA circus. What's going on? I typed deleted, typed again. Finally sent, ask him who Hale is. 3 dots flashed, then nothing. By sunrise, I stood outside. First Fairfield Bank box key, biting my palm. Inside 43B lay a single envelope, Eleanor's violet wax unbroken, and a photographic negative labeled Original Whitmore Crest, 1871. On the negative, the phoenix gleamed, no hawk anywhere. My phone buzzed, Jen Shore report ready. In the parking lot, I opened it. Julian Whitmore, 99.9998% probability. Relief punched my knees weak, but dread shadowed it. Lawrence would counter-strike before I could even breathe. Sure enough, another email from Garrison. We possess independent genetic proof disproving your lineage. Present tomorrow or withdraw. Attached was a blurry PDF showing my name misspelled and a neon 0.00% probability, obvious forgery, but enough to muddy water. Mom clenched her coffee mug so hard I feared it'd shatter. He's bluffing. But people believe first headlines, not retractions. We need undeniable records, I said. Hospital ledger, adoption certificate, everything. Julian faxed copies within the hour. I compiled a dossier thicker than a law textbook, each tab a nail in Lawrence's coffin. But the man wasn't done. That evening, local news ran an anonymous tip alleging I'd manipulated an elderly woman's will. The anchor quoted sources close to the family. Camden's voice strained on background. Lawrence was turning my brothers into pawns. I refused to flinch. Instead, I slipped into Eleanor's study, placed the Phoenix negative on her old light box, and watched the flaming bird glow amber, a crest of rebirth. My rebirth. At midnight, thunder rattled window panes as a courier arrived, special delivery scheduled by Eleanor months earlier. Inside the parcel, a second sealed letter marked, "To be opened at the will reading only if the bloodline is questioned." My pulse thudded. Grandmother had orchestrated her own posthumous checkmate. I slid the parcel into my briefcase beside the DNA proof adoption records and the original crest. Tomorrow the library would host more than oak shelves and nervous relatives. It would host truth sharpened to a blade. And yet one last twist waited, coiled and silent, ready to strike, before anyone uttered the words, "I object." The truth was a loaded gun. Now I had to aim it before Lawrence shot first. The courthouse loomed like a gray fortress as I filed the emergency motion with Miriam's junior partner, a wiry woman named Rosa Batista, who handled the paperwork while Miriam lay recovering. Inside my briefcase rested 3 ticking bombs, Julian's DNA proof, the hospital adoption ledger, and Eleanor's sealed letter, labeled "open only if blood is questioned." Rosa scanned the documents, eyebrows climbing. "You realize this could strip Lawrence of everything?" I met her gaze. "He started this blood crusade. I'm ending it." That afternoon, I confronted my brothers. Camden waited outside Whitmore Capitol Rain, sheeting off his umbrella. His jaw tensed when he saw the crest ring. "Dad says you forged that. Ask him why the original Whitmore symbol is a phoenix, not a hawk." Confusion flickered. I handed him a photocopy of the 1871 crest beside Lawrence's rebrand Firebird versus Predatory Talon. He rewrote our history, Cam, and he lied about mine. Seth emerged from the revolving door, mid-argument, legal pads beneath his arm. "Dad's furious. He's filing an injunction to gag you. Then listen before lawyers gag all of us," I said. I laid out the adoption record and my GenSure report beneath the awning's drip. Rain blurred the ink, but not the meaning. Lawrence Hale, not Whitmore. Julian, my father. Camden's shoulders slumped. Seth's courtroom confidence cracked. "We need to verify," Seth murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. "Do it," I urged. "Truth survives scrutiny. Lies don't." Julian and I met at a quiet diner off I-95 neutral ground. He slid a thin envelope across the Formica table, Lawrence's original birth certificate smuggled from the county archives by a colleague. Name Lawrence Hale, parents unknown, date adopted. July 3, 1968. Once this is public, Julian warned Lawrence may implode. "Are you ready for that fallout?" "He demolished my identity for profit," I said. "I won't let him bulldoze Eleanor's wishes, too." Julian's eyes. My eyes softened. "Then let's make sure tomorrow leaves no room for doubt." We spent hours rehearsing our strategy. Rosa would present the DNA chain of custody. Julian would testify to the ledger's authenticity. I would reserve Eleanor's sealed letter for the fatal blow. Across the diner, a TV droned breaking news. Whitmore heir challenges daughter's legitimacy. My photograph flickered on screen, captioned, "Imposter heiress Lawrence's smear campaign was working overtime." Before we parted, Julian pressed a small velvet pouch into my palm. "Eleanor asked me to pass this along if things turned ugly." Inside lay her signet pendant, engraved with the Latin motto, "Veritas vincit, truth prevails." I fastened it around my neck, its weight both anchor and armor. Night deepened. I drove home through mist headlights, carving tunnels and fog. Half hidden by oak shadows, a black sedan idled outside my townhouse, Garrison Hyde behind the wheel. He rolled down the window, rain-speckled grin, slick as oil. Last chance, Lena. Sign Dad's settlement. $250 grand and you disappear. I leaned in far enough for him to smell my resolve. Tell Lawrence the lineage he worships never belonged to him. Tomorrow everyone will know. His smirk faltered. Careful. Some truths bury people. Only if they're afraid to live outside the lies. I walked away, pendant warm against my sternum. Inside, Mom waited with a stack of manila folders, Eleanor's personal investment notes. If you win, she said, these holdings become yours and Julian's. They're more valuable than the trust. She traced the Phoenix ring. Your grandmother predicted every move Lawrence would make. She believed you'd finish what she started. For the first time since the study confrontation, I felt something brighter than fear burn in my chest. Purpose. I spent the night cross-referencing portfolios, marking assets Lawrence couldn't touch, drafting contingency plans for charitable foundations Eleanor hinted at. Thunder grumbled overhead like ancient drums. Dawn bled pale through the blinds just as I closed the last file. Across town, the Whitmore Library was being prepped with fresh flowers and polished silver carafes, as though cosmetics could hide the fight about to unfold. I donned a charcoal suit, Eleanor's pendant, and tucked the sealed letter inside my jacket. In the mirror, storm-gray eyes stared back, steeled by generations of women who refused to be written out. As I stepped through the front door, my phone buzzed. Unknown number voicemail. Lawrence's voice, raw and desperate, hissed. Withdraw now or I'll make sure you regret ever bearing the Whitmore name. I deleted it, because in a few hours the world would learn which one of us had the right to that name at all. But just before gavel met wood, a single witness I never expected walked into the mansion ready to testify. And everything tilted again. The library doors groaned open like a throat clearing before judgment. Polished oak crystal decanters, fresh chrysanthemums. Lawrence had staged a royal court for his crowning. I walked in with Rosa Julian and a briefcase full of dynamite. The sealed envelope from Eleanor pressed against my ribs, warm as a heartbeat. Hook one truth can pierce an empire, but only if you tear off the armor first. The players assembled Lawrence at the head hawk crest cufflinks gleaming. Garrison Hyde beside him, folders stacked like fortifications. Camden and Seth on the right, wary eyes ping-ponging between us. A thin, elderly woman in a nurse's uniform slipped into the back row, unknown witness. Judge Pro Tem, Harold Green, rapped a gavel for order. Today we clarify beneficiary eligibility under Eleanor Whitmore's trust. His gaze cut through the perfume of generational wealth. Garrison struck first. My client submits genetic evidence Ms. Lena Whitmore shares 0 DNA with Lawrence Whitmore. Therefore, she is ineligible. He brandished a neon-highlighted report, the forged one. Rosa rose, voice ringing. Objection. Chain of custody violates Connecticut Statute 19A 585. DNA acquired without consent is inadmissible. She laid our GenSure results on the table. Chain of custody signed by Dr. Patel. Furthermore, we submit evidence that Dr. Julian Whitmore is Ms. Whitmore's biological father, establishing direct blood descent from Eleanor. Camden's inhale was audible. Seth's pen slipped from his fingers. Lawrence slammed his fist. Irrelevant. The trust requires descent through the eldest son's legitimate line. I stood. Then we must verify your bloodline, father. Gasps rippled. Rosa produced the county birth ledger. Exhibit B, Lawrence Hale, adopted July 3, 1968 by Harold and Eleanor Whitmore. No genetic relation to the Whitmore line. Lawrence's face drained bone white. Garrison stuttered. Adoption grants full filial rights. Not under the 1949 trust codicil, Julian interjected, voice steady. It states blood descendants only may inherit principal assets. Judge Green scanned the fragile parchment. Rosa slid forward. The language is explicit. His gavel hovered. Before it fell, the elderly nurse rose. Your Honor, I am May Grant, retired maternity nurse. I witnessed the adoption. This certificate she tapped the ledger is authentic. Lawrence lurched to his feet. She's lying, bought and paid for. I pulled Eleanor's envelope. Grandmother anticipated you, Lawrence. Wax cracked. Paper sighed. I read, if blood becomes a weapon, let truth be the blade. Lawrence, I loved you as a son, but your obsession with pedigree mocks our name. Julian and Lena carry my blood and, more importantly, my values. The estate follows them. Judge Green accepted the letter, eyes narrowing at Eleanor's signature and notarization. The gavel struck once, twice. Effective immediately, Lawrence Hale's rights under the trust are void. Dr. Julian Whitmore and Ms. Lena Whitmore inherit controlling interest. The room exploded, voices, chairs, screeching, cameras flashing. Lawrence roared, lunging for the letter. Camden and Seth restrained him as security intervened. Garrison Hyde backed away, pale as marble. Julian reached for my hand, and for the first time I felt what a father's grasp should be, steady, proud. Across the chaos, Mom wept, joy, regret, release tangled together. Judge Green called for order, but the battle was won. Lawrence's hawk cufflinks looked suddenly cheap, tarnished by the truth he had sharpened against himself. As security escorted him out, Lawrence twisted to me, voice shredded. You'll regret this. I held up Eleanor's phoenix ring. The family rises, Lawrence, just not with you. He vanished down the hall, footsteps echoing like the last beat of a failed dynasty. But even as victory settled on my shoulders, a chill followed. The empire was now mine to rebuild, debts and cracked foundations included. And somewhere in the fine print of Eleanor's portfolio lay one final surprise she'd reserved for her chosen heir. The echo of her legacy was still racing toward me, ready to land its final note. Every empire ends with an echo, but mine began with one. The mansion felt different the morning after the verdict lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Sun spilled through arched windows, revealing moats dancing like tiny phoenix embers. Lawrence's portraits were gone, boxed up and shipped to whatever condo he'd fled to with Garrison Hyde in damage control mode. The hawk banners came down next, replaced by the original crest. Eleanor loved a phoenix in mid-rise wings, flaming gold. Julian and I walked the hallways together, our steps slow, reverent. We paused before grandmother's study. I eased the door open, half expecting her to greet us with Earl Grey and sly counsel. Instead, silence ripe with unfinished plans wrapped around us. On the desk lay Eleanor's final ledger, one page, folded edges worn by her fingertips. I unfolded it. Eleanor had rerouted a third of her personal fortune into a legacy of renewal fund earmarked for restoring neglected historic sites and scholarships for women in architecture and medical research. My worlds and Julian's braided by her foresight. Dad knew Lawrence had mocked my quaint preservation hobby. Now it sat at the heart of the Whitmore rebirth. I felt both vindicated and humbled. Julian's hand rested on my shoulder. She chose you for this, he said, voice thick. Let's honor her by doing it right. Camden and Seth arrived at noon, eyes clear of their father's shadow for the first time in years. Camden spoke first. We reviewed the trust. You're in charge, but we'd like to help rebuild if you'll have us. I searched their faces for hidden motives, found only fatigue and tentative hope. I nodded. We start fresh. Phoenix rules, transparency, integrity, no bloodline games. May Grant, the retired nurse, sent me a handwritten note. Truth heals across generations. Thank you for finishing what Eleanor began. I framed it beside Eleanor's letter. News outlets called nonstop hungry for drama. I released a single statement. The Whitmore legacy will rise by uplifting communities, not by guarding gates. Shares in Whitmore Capital surged. Apparently, integrity has market value. Lawrence tried one last lawsuit claiming emotional distress. The judge dismissed it with prejudice. The adoption file and forged DNA test ensured his defeat. Public sympathy swung hard in our favor after documents leaked, showing his years of charitable tax write-offs that never reached charities. The empire he coveted collapsed into fines and restitution orders. The man who sneered at imposters was exposed as the ultimate pretender. Mom moved into Eleanor's carriage house, sunlight returning to her eyes. She and Julian spent slow evenings on the veranda rebuilding a friendship 27 years delayed. Sometimes I'd catch them laughing like college kids, and a deep peace would settle in my chest. I launched the Phoenix Fellowship 6 months later, full scholarships for first-gen women in architecture and medicine. At the inaugural gala, Julian introduced me as his daughter to a room of donors. My voice trembled only once when I told Eleanor's favorite story about the phoenix. It rises not because the past burns away, but because ashes are rich soil for new beginnings. As applause echoed, I glanced at the portrait of Eleanor now hanging center stage, her knowing smile captured in oil and light. She had engineered this redemption arc with chessmaster precision, but left me the final move to choose grace over vengeance. I realized that in the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't the fortune, it was the freedom to write a new honest Whitmore narrative. And Lawrence, somewhere beyond the glow of the gala, he nursed bitterness in obscurity, haunted by an echo of his own words. Only blood relatives deserve the fortune. They did. He never was one. I drifted onto the balcony city lights, flickering like scattered embers. Julian joined me, pressing a fresh envelope into my palm. Found this in Eleanor's journal addressed to the Phoenix. Figured she meant you. Inside, a single line. Build boldly, Lena. The world needs your fire. I closed my eyes, inhaling night air sharp with possibility. For the first time since Lawrence's accusation, my heart felt weightless, unburdened by doubt, blazing with purpose. Eleanor was right. Truth had prevailed, and from these ashes I would build something magnificent. Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to rise stronger than before? Share your story below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing Phoenix family. My own mother said it like she was asking about the weather. Since you don't have kids or a mortgage, you can cover $10,000 for Dylan's wedding, right? The same parents who still owe me $32 grand looked at me like I should be grateful for the chance. My brother laughed, flashing his new watch paid for with my loan. I didn't argue. I just smiled, slid my phone onto the table, and hit record. A minute later, the knock at the door made them jump. They had no idea who I'd invited, or how fast their little system was about to collapse. Before we get into it, hit like and tell me where you're watching from Ever Been the Family's Emergency Fund. I grew up believing love meant sacrifice. When I was 16, I worked weekends at a diner off Maple Street, saving tips in a cracked mason jar labeled Family Fund. My mom would pat my hand every Sunday and say, "You're such a good girl, Claire. You understand responsibility." I thought that meant love. I didn't realize it meant obedience. The habit never stopped. Birthdays, promotions, tax refunds, every extra dollar went somewhere else. Mom's credit card debt, Dad's truck payment, Dylan's business venture that turned into a trip to Cabo. They called it helping family. I called it keeping the peace. The one time I hesitated, Mom's face fell so fast I panicked. "We do it for you," she said softly. That was her favorite lie. On paper, we looked perfect. A neat house in the suburbs, Sunday dinners, framed graduation photos, hung in matching silver frames. But under that polish, every meal was a transaction. The dining table wasn't for sharing, it was for negotiations. Dad had a way of clearing his throat before any request. I used to tense up at the sound. Mom would pour wine first, pretending it was casual. Dylan, the golden child, would arrive late, toss his keys on the counter, and grin like he was doing us a favor by showing up. He'd talk about his next investment, about Hawaii, about his fiancée's designer gown, while I quietly passed the mashed potatoes. There were times I caught my reflection in the silverware and barely recognized myself. Tired eyes, polite smile, the dependable daughter who never said no. The one who kept receipts in labeled envelopes but never dared to use them. because in this family, bringing up money meant betrayal. Still, part of me kept hoping they'd see me, not as their lender, but as their daughter, the one who used to draw crayon cards for them, who still showed up with casseroles and hugs. That illusion finally cracked 6 months ago in the dentist's parking lot. I was shaking from pain, holding the estimate for emergency surgery $3,000 due immediately. My savings were gone, drained by years of temporary loans. When I called Mom, my voice was breaking. "I just need help until payday," I said. She sighed like I was a stranger asking for a favor. "Oh, honey, we're a little tight. Can't you put it on a credit card?" I remember staring at my rearview mirror, watching my own face twist between disbelief and shame. 2 days later, Dylan posted a photo of his new BMW in their driveway. Mom commented, "So proud of you, sweetheart." That was the moment I realized the truth. I'd avoided my whole life. My love had never been enough. Only my money had. Still, I didn't stop hoping things could change, because that's what people like me do. We keep showing up even when the door keeps closing. But the next time I knocked, I wasn't bringing cash. I was bringing consequences. 2 weeks after that call, Mom's tone changed again. Warm, sugary, dangerous. "We're having a little family dinner on Sunday," she said. "Nothing fancy, just a few of us talking wedding plans. You'll come, right?" I almost said yes out of habit, but something in her voice made me pause. "Sure," I said slowly. "Who's coming?" "Oh, just close family," she replied quickly, "and a few people helping Dylan and Emily plan things." That Sunday, I scrolled through Instagram while microwaving leftovers alone in my apartment. The first photo hit like a slap my parents, Dylan, his fiancée, her parents all smiling at a long table under soft lights. The caption read, "Family dinner wedding plans coming together." I stared at it for a long minute, my fork halfway to my mouth. Close family. That's what she'd said. I typed a quick text. "What dinner is this?" Her reply came seconds later. "Oh, sweetheart, it was just for those directly involved in planning." Directly involved. I let out a dry laugh. So I was useful enough to fund the event, but not important enough to be invited. It might have ended there, but humiliation has a way of multiplying. The next week was the 4th of July barbecue in our neighborhood, the one Mom loved hosting because it made her look generous. I brought my potato salad and that same obedient smile, ready to keep the peace. But peace isn't what they wanted. By the grill, I heard her voice floating through the chatter. "We're worried about Claire," she said to Mrs. Campbell and 2 neighbors, tone dripping with pity. "She's having a hard time financially. That's why she couldn't help with Dylan's bachelor party." My hand froze mid-scoop. She was lying so smoothly you'd think she believed it. "She's always been bad with money, bless her heart," Mom added. "We try to guide her, but she just doesn't listen." The women nodded their eyes, turning toward me, soft, judgmental, full of fake sympathy. My chest burned. I set down the bowl before it slipped from my hands. The truth was, I hadn't paid for that bachelor party because I was still digging out from the dental bill, the one she'd refused to help with. For the first time, I didn't go inside to clean up or offer dessert. I just left. Drove home in silence with fireworks flashing red and white in my rearview mirror, like the world was celebrating my breaking point. That night, Dad called. His voice was heavy, rehearsed. "Your grandma's medical bills are piling up," he said. "If you can't help family, who can you help? Just 3,000 Claire." The guilt stabbed hard, but something in his tone didn't sit right. The next morning, I drove an hour to visit Grandma at her retirement community. She looked up from her crossword puzzle, bright-eyed as ever. "Medical bills," she repeated, confused. "Oh, no, dear. My insurance covers everything." For a moment, the world went silent. Then it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. I went home, pulled out the shoebox of receipts I'd kept for years, and began lining them across the floor. Dates, amounts, signatures. My so-called family's history spelled out in ink. I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop and typed 3 words at the top. They owe me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. The next few nights, I barely slept. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of my laptop fan and the shuffle of papers, receipts, transfer screenshots, text messages, every thank you that had come with a hidden knife. I arranged them chronologically, watching a pattern form like a stain spreading across fabric. 11 years of giving 11 years of being used. By Friday, I had a binder thick enough to rival a case file. Maybe that's why I called Sophie. We'd been friends in college before life drifted us apart. She'd gone into law and I'd gone into teaching two different kinds of caretaking. When she answered, her voice was sharp as ever. Claire. It's been ages. I think I'm in trouble, I said quietly. Financial trouble, she asked. Family trouble, I corrected. I told her everything, the loans, the manipulation, the fake medical bills. By the time I finished, my throat ached. Sophie was silent for a long time before saying, "What they're doing isn't just unethical, it's abuse." The word hit like a slap. Abuse. I'd spent years thinking of myself as too sensitive, too dramatic. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. Her tone shifted. "Oh, there's a lot you can do, but first we document everything legally." Over the next week, Sophie helped me file affidavits, organize bank statements, and record new phone calls. Every time Mom or Dad reached out, I let it ring 3 times before answering and hit record. Each conversation sounded the same guilt pressure the word family wielded like a weapon. Then came the text that turned everything from insult to war. From Mom, great news. "We've put you down for $8,000 toward Dylan's honeymoon. The travel agent needs it by Friday. We know teaching doesn't pay much, but family sacrifices for family." I stared at it, feeling the heat rise behind my eyes. I showed it to Sophie the next day in her office. She shook her head slowly. "They're escalating. They think they still own you." She typed something fast on her computer. "Let's check your credit," she murmured. A few clicks later, she froze. "Claire? Did you open a credit card 5 years ago under an account ending in 7439? "No," I said immediately. Her face hardened. "Your brother did." The screen showed charges from luxury stores, flight tickets, and missed payments, all under my name. My credit score had been quietly bleeding for years. I felt my stomach drop, but Sophie's calm steadied me. "This is identity theft," she said, "and I promise you we can prove it." For the first time, I wasn't scared. I was angry, clean, sharp anger, the kind that clears the fog. That night, Dad called again. "We need to talk about your attitude," he said, his voice hard. "Sunday dinner. Be there." When I hung up, I didn't hesitate. I forwarded the message to Sophie. Her reply came seconds later. "Perfect. Let's make it a family meeting they'll never forget." Sunday came dressed like any other, quiet afternoon sunlight spilling through my blinds, the smell of detergent from the laundry next door, but inside me, everything was still. No fear, no guilt, just resolve. Sophie pulled up in front of my apartment right on time. She wore a charcoal blazer and carried the black briefcase that had terrified more people than any weapon could. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. Been ready for 11 years. The drive to my parents' house felt shorter than it ever had, maybe because every mile peeled away another layer of obedience. By the time we turned into their familiar cul-de-sac, I wasn't the same daughter who used to sit quietly through their lectures. I was the woman they'd built and broken, and now the woman coming to collect. Mom's house looked perfect as always. White porch swing, fresh hydrangeas, the smell of cinnamon potpourri floating through the open window. The same setting for every emotional ambush. I could almost hear her voice echoing, "Smile, Claire. Family sees everything." We stepped onto the porch. I didn't knock. Inside, they were waiting like judges behind a long, invisible bench. Mom perched on her armchair, hands clasped in saintly patience. Dad stood near the fireplace posture, rigid. Dylan lounged on the couch, scrolling his phone, wearing that same watch he bought with my loan. Mom broke the silence first. "You're late, sweetheart. I brought someone with me." I said, my tone calm, almost kind. Dad frowned. "This is a family meeting." "Exactly," I said, opening the door wider. Sophie stepped in. The click of her heels on the hardwood sounded louder than thunder. The air changed tight electric. "Who is this?" Mom asked, her voice sharp now. "This is Sophie Tran," I said evenly, "my attorney." For a second, no one breathed. Mom laughed, a shaky, nervous sound. "Claire, what on earth she's here," I interrupted, "to discuss the $32,000 you owe me plus interest, and the fraudulent credit card opened under my name." Dylan's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the floor. "That's ridiculous," Dad barked. "You're suing your own family." "I'm holding them accountable," I said. "There's a difference." Sophie placed the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a soft metallic click. Inside were neatly labeled folders. She began laying them out one by one: loan agreements, text screenshots, bank transfers, voice transcripts. "These are legally binding promissory notes signed by Marianne and Frank Monroe," she said clearly. "And here, bank statements proving the funds left Ms. Monroe's account and entered yours. Additionally, here's evidence of a credit card in her name opened and used by Mr. Dylan Monroe." Mom's hand flew to her chest. "We didn't mean those were just family notes." "The court doesn't see them that way," Sophie said smoothly, "especially not after reviewing the recordings." "Recordings?" Dylan's voice cracked. I met his eyes. "Every call, every message. You said it yourself. Families help families. I just helped us all remember how." Dad's face reddened. "You're destroying this family, Claire." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed it when you treated me like an ATM." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then Sophie pulled one last folder from her case and slid it forward. "As of this morning, a court order has frozen your joint accounts pending investigation." Dad's mouth opened, then closed again. Mom let out a strangled sob. "You froze our accounts. We can't even pay for Dylan's wedding now." Sophie's tone stayed professional. "Financial abuse is a crime, Mrs. Monroe. Consider this an opportunity to reflect on priorities." Dylan shot up, pacing. "This is insane. You think you can ruin our lives because of some old paperwork. You did that yourself," I said. "You used my name to open credit. That's fraud." His voice rose. "It was a mistake," I stood up. "No, Dylan. A mistake is forgetting a birthday card. This was theft, and you knew exactly what you were doing." The rage in his eyes faltered, replaced by fear. That was new. That was power. Mom tried one last time. "Claire, please. We're family. You don't have to go through with this." I looked at her. Really looked. The woman who'd taught me that love meant debt. The woman who'd said, "We'd do the same for you," but never did. "You're right," I said softly. "I don't have to. But I will." Sophie gathered her documents, snapped the briefcase shut, and nodded to me. "We'll be in touch within 30 days for payment arrangements," she said formally. "If restitution isn't made, we'll proceed with litigation." We turned toward the door. Behind me, chairs scraped, voices cracked, Mom crying, Dad muttering curses, Dylan whispering, "What are we going to do?" under his breath. I didn't turn around. Outside, the air felt lighter, cleaner. Sophie looked at me as we reached the car. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly. "I think so." "What's that feel like?" I glanced back at the house one last time, like breathing for the first time. 3 months later, the judgment came through. Full repayment plus interest. Dylan pleaded down on the credit card fraud, but the penalty still hit hard restitution financial counseling and a stain on his record that no apology could erase. The Hawaii wedding evaporated into a local country club ceremony no one attended. Mom texted once, "You've torn this family apart." I replied, "No, I just stopped being your bank." She never answered. The silence that followed didn't hurt. It healed. 3 months later, the check cleared. $32,000 and change, 11 years of exhaustion, reduced to neat black numbers on a bank statement. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was quiet. Not revenge, not rage, just peace. I used part of it for something small but symbolic, a down payment on a tiny 2-bedroom house with peeling white paint and a yard big enough for a garden. The first time I turned the key, I laughed, really laughed, because for once it was mine, not something I bought for someone else. Grandma came to visit the next weekend. She brought cookies, asked if I was happy, and when I nodded, she squeezed my hand and said, "It's good to see you breathing easy again." That sentence stayed with me. I spent evenings planting herbs by the porch, listening to the wind move through the leaves, realizing how different silence feels when it's not made of guilt. Mom still sends the occasional text, "You'll regret this," or "We raised you better." Dad hasn't called since court. Dylan's wedding photos never appeared online. Sometimes I scroll through old pictures of us, family dinners, birthdays, fake smiles, and I almost don't recognize that girl sitting at the edge of the table, always ready to pay the bill. She looks small. She isn't me anymore. Now, when someone says family helps family, I smile politely and think, yes, but real family doesn't ask you to bleed for it. Freedom doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly in the sound of a door closing behind you and the calm that follows when you finally know you'll never open it again. If you've ever been the responsible one, the fixer, the one who keeps giving until there's nothing left, this story's for you. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you heartless. It makes you whole. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. If this story hit close to home, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. You're not alone, not anymore.